Look, I totally agree that it's really important to invest time paying down tech debt in our software applications. But I do disagree with some of the mentality around how we approach refactoring and when we should be doing that. I see a lot of people promoting that as you're coding things, you should be refactoring as you go. And while I'm not opposed to the idea of doing this, I think I'm opposed to the implementation of how I see people suggesting this. In this video, I'm going to walk you through my approaches for addressing tech debt and refactoring based on my experiences at a startup, where unfortunately, I was the contributor of a lot of the tech debt that existed. Just a quick note that if you're interested in learning more about refactoring and tech debt, pay close attention to the pinned comments below. And another reminder that if you're not already subscribed to my weekly software engineering newsletter, you can find a link there as well. Alright, so let's dive into the discussion. So I mentioned that I'm not opposed to the idea of doing tech debt as you're going along with other feature development or bug fixes, but what I am opposed to is doing it completely in line with that set of work. And there's a few reasons for this, and I want to start by backing up and explaining where I'm coming from. I spent a large part of my career being a software engineer and an engineering manager at the same time. So when it comes to things like what's a priority in terms of software development, I often wear two hats when I'm thinking about this. And as a programmer and someone that likes developing software, I like thinking about refactoring. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy having clean code. I understand the cost as a software developer of being in a place where it's, brittle code, hard to test, lack of tests, code's hard to read, all of these things. I understand that investing time into that can really have a big impact on your ability to move forward and deliver in that space. And then as a software engineering manager, I also wear the hat of trying to think about the different priorities and trying to understand the business value so that we can always be focused on the highest priority things. And if I go back to some of my earlier days when I was working at a startup and we were really trying to figure out ways that we could properly prioritize tech debt, we tried doing this thing where we had tech debt sprints. And the idea here is that we all agreed that tech debt was important to address, but we had so many other high priority things like bug fixes and feature development that we said, look, let's put our heads down, get that work out of the way, and then sort of as a reward or before we're planning for the next phase that we're going to start delivering things, let's make sure that we have a full sprint where we can go address all of this important tech debt. And that way the engineers are happy, but also the product managers or product owners are happy as well. But this was a really fast moving startup, and as you might imagine, we would get into our tech debt sprint and we'd have feature requests coming up or bug fixes. And truly, if I reflect on some of those instances, they were high priority things. In the field that we were working in, if we had any type of error in the data that we were presenting, that could be a huge problem for our customers. And the side effect of this whole thing going on was that our tech debt sprints were often very interrupted by other normal work that wasn't tech debt. Now, when you have this kind of thing going on, what ends up happening is that engineers end up having their trust eroded with the product owners and the people scheduling the work. They're told, yeah, you're going to get a tech debt sprint, but what they actually have happen is this situation where a lot of that tech debt they don't actually get to work on. And this ends up leading them into another direction that is really similar to this Boy Scouting approach where people are refactoring or addressing tech debt as they go. And the reason I want to focus on this part in contrast with what people are recommending online is because I think a lot of them are painting what's more of like a cheery picture of how this works. And when they do it this way on the surface, it seems really good. So for example, what a lot of people are suggesting online is that you're reading through this code and you're seeing stuff that, could have better names, it could have better structure to have more clarity. You're going to be making it better for the next person coming along. If you already know that and you're already there, you might as well fix it up as you're going. I've even seen some people saying like, how could you break it just by refactoring it? You might as well make the fixes and then you have that all along with the stuff that you're delivering. There's this focus on being able to streamline that tech debt paydown so much that you can refactor all of your work just as you're going. And I just think that that's too idealistic. So I want to walk you through some of the things that I was seeing in real life, in real scenarios. Okay, so in the situation where our engineers are now no longer really believing that they're going to have time to address the tech debt, they're taking matters into their own hands. Because we all did agree that paying down tech debt is important. We do need to have code that we can work in so that we can deliver things properly. So people started to do this Boy Scouting approach where they were making changes, refactoring things, cleaning things up, and then committing that with their feature or bug fix. But guess what? A lot of that code wasn't tested or wasn't tested well. So what would end up happening is either the feature or the fix that they were putting in, that had to get reverted. And along with it was the refactoring effort that they had alongside that. Or what was more common was that the thing that they were trying to refactor ended up breaking because there wasn't good test coverage in place. Now, their new feature or that really important bug fix they had to deliver, yep, that's backed out as well because the whole commit has to get reverted. So an easy little suggestion there is if you're going to do any refactoring in line, I would highly recommend just separating out the commit from the work that you're doing. Then you're not coupling when you have to back changes out should something go wrong. Okay, we also had some teams that were doing different types of estimation, like story points or other things. And when you have people that aren't totally aligned on what work has to get done, because you have some people that are planning behind the scenes to go do refactoring work, they know they're going to be cleaning things up, it's really difficult to get alignment between different people on the amount of work involved. Now, personally, I'm not a huge fan of sitting down and spending a lot of time throwing out story points and trying to get the right estimate in place, because I often feel the conversations are beneficial when you're talking about features, but oftentimes, the amount of effort that goes into getting an accurate estimate is a total waste. But for the teams that were doing this ended up causing a lot of churn and a lot of time wasted because people can't really align on what needs to be delivered. So just calling out that we had this separation in what's actually supposed to be delivered, what's really a priority, and the amount of work that was going to be going into particular features or bug fixes. And the third thing I want to call out that is arguably one of the most impactful things when it's taken to the extreme case is this situation where people can't really prioritize properly the amount of effort that goes into some refactoring. Now, I know in an ideal case, if you're working with engineers and their product owners, what should be happening is that if some amount of refactoring is taking place, or you're having these stand-up meetings and syncs to make sure that people are progressing, you'd be able to catch something like a rogue refactor that's going on for too long. I totally get it, but I'm basing this information on real scenarios that happened and not just some hypothetical ideal situation. Now, in some situations, we'd have these more junior engineers that would be doing refactoring work alongside their feature development. And sometimes, as junior engineers, they don't have a really good idea of prioritizing and time management. So they would end up getting really stuck and going down rabbit holes trying to refactor things. Now, if this kind of thing isn't caught in a stand-up or a sync-up meeting, it's really easy for this to go off the rails for that individual. They might be spending a ton of time doing some type of cleanup or refactoring, and the thing that they were assigned that should have been, a small amount of effort is now just totally running over. But it's not just limited to more junior software engineers, and in fact, with the more senior ones, I've seen this get significantly worse. There are cases where more senior software engineers have decided that they understand the priority of having to refactor something. And it's the same type of situation where it's not necessarily caught in a stand-up or a sync meeting, and they're kind of going down this path where they need to start refactoring and making big sweeping changes to the code base in order to support the refactor work that they deem as a priority. Now, when this is finally caught onto, what ends up happening is like, look, I've already spent so much time investing into this, and we're really close. We should just finish up this refactoring work. And by the way, that feature over here and this bug fix over here? Well, they all really depend on this refactoring work, so I should just move ahead, and once I land this, these other things can land or get scheduled as well. But as you might expect, things aren't always that simple, because that refactoring work, that gets pushed out yet another week. There was something else that came up in the refactoring, and we have to account for that too. So yeah, that bug fix and that feature, yeah, they're still waiting on this, but the good news is there's yet another bug fix that once we land this refactoring, it's totally going to be able to get incorporated right into the code very easily after this. And this pattern continues on. Now, there are certainly ways that we can address this as it's ongoing, but the whole point that I'm trying to make here is that I think when we jump into this behavior of let me just kind of ninja the fixes or the refactoring in, let me Boy Scout some things, if you're not setting some guidelines for that, or you're just assuming that everyone has the same level of knowledge and experience to be able to do that effectively, I think you get into some dangerous territory. Now, I'm not a huge fan of necessarily like setting these hard and fast rules that every team has to take on, because I've certainly worked with more senior software engineers that are working in mature code bases that they spent a lot of time working in. They probably can go handle some simple refactors alongside what they're doing, and things more often than not will work out really well. So it's not like a rule that I want to carve in stone. But what I would suggest is that instead of trying to Boy Scout all of your changes in, I would say try to get those prioritized alongside your features and your bug fixes. And if you're hearing that and immediately wanting to resist it going, Nick, well, that's never going to work. The product owners are just never going to schedule that. We've seen it time and time again where we're saying, hey, we want to go refactor this. Hey, there's tech debt here. And the product owner's like, too bad, we got features and bug fixes. Well, this might be kind of tough to hear, but I want you to think about this. The responsibility of the product owner is to help ensure that value is getting shipped to the customer. And a lot of the times, a product owner will not totally understand the value of the tech debt. They will usually have a bias where as a product owner, they're not going to be thinking that this tech debt here or over there should get prioritized over a critical bug fix or a feature that customers are asking for. Ultimately, it's going to be up to you to help bridge that gap. Now, your product owner is interested in business value. Like I said, their goal is to get value shipped to the customer. So I would say more often than not, if your product owner is not taking the time to schedule tech debt, it's because you're not able to clearly articulate what the value is of that tech debt, especially how it might align with the other work that's coming up. So to give you an example, consider an area of code that hadn't been touched in years. You've gone looking through it and you said, holy crap, this code is disgusting. And it looks like there aren't even really many tests here. We really need to refactor this code to get it tested and make sure that it's more readable and that more people coming through here can easily start making changes without having to worry about it. I mean, that sounds like a really good opportunity for refactoring something. If the code's that bad, it probably needs some attention. But being a good candidate for refactoring doesn't necessarily mean that it's a priority of work to do. So why should your product owner go schedule that? So for example, if you didn't have any upcoming work that required changes in that area of the code, is that really going to offer any benefit to your product owner if you spend time going to refactor that? Likely not. And I mean, maybe you just had a lot of changes recently. Maybe in the last couple of sprints, you were making changes to this area of the code that hadn't been touched in ages before that. And the side effect of that was that you guys were breaking things and you had bugs that were coming up and you had to, spend extra time fixing these bugs and trying to play around with the code. That might be a really good argument to your product owner to say, look, we had to spend so much extra unplanned time delivering changes there because it was so brutal to work in. And you know what? You have 2 more features scheduled coming up that you really want us to land. But we saw how costly that was. If you give us a sprint or whatever the time frame is, we think that we could clean this up, make sure we have better test coverage in place, and that way when we go to add those new features in, we're not risking going overboard with our timelines. That might mean that we're pushing out the initial timeline a little bit, but we have a lot more certainty in delivering the other work after because it will be tested and it will be a lot more clear for us to work through. To me, that might be a lot better of a sell to a product owner to get them to prioritize it. But the reality is, all that you're doing is enabling the product owner to have more information to make a better decision. At the end of the day, they might say, look, I still don't think that it's worth to invest the time into that. And there's going to be situations where that happens. There's going to be situations where a product owner is totally comfortable incurring yet more debt or taking on some of that risk. But in my opinion, the best that you can do as a software engineer in these situations is make sure that you're providing as much information about the value, and I mean the business value and how that's going to help deliver value to the customers when you're trying to articulate why you should be focused on tech debt. So to summarize my perspective on this, I think that tech debt is absolutely important to be paying down and that refactoring code is super important for us to be focused on. Personally, I think that the way that we can accomplish this is by scheduling tech debt alongside other features and bug fixes. I think we have a responsibility as software engineers to make sure that we're articulating the business value for why we should be spending time on it. And it's not an easy thing to do. We have to wear a different hat and think about our perspective as a product owner and how we would want to deliver value to the customers, even though we're talking about something like refactoring code. I think that Boy Scouting changes can work when you're trying to refactor things and clean up as you go. I totally think it can work, but I do think that people have this vision that it's a lot more ideal than it is in reality. So at the end of the day, all I can encourage you to do is think about the pros and cons of these different approaches, think about how your team can operate more effectively, and ideally you're just focused on more collaboration when it comes to being able to focus on tech debt. So thanks so much for watching this video, and if you're interested in hearing more about how my career ended up here and how I have this perspective on tech debt, you can watch this video next. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.